we've seen a lot of examples. So farmers from central Kenya who grow vegetables, or farmers from the Rift Valley who grow tea and coffee. We have seen stories in our publications in The Nation, in The Standard, and about the effect of these chemicals, right? So why do you think there is a push, rather, for these farmers to adopt the use of these chemicals from our government agencies, especially from our extension officers and stuff?
I think for me it's about and cells, especially from the multinational companies behind the agrochemicals. Because if you look at the statistics, only 5% of the pesticide cells are in Africa. And you see the population of young Africans.
Yeah.
And we say 80% of the food grown in Africa is by smallholder farmers, right? So the cells, there's room for the multinational companies to actually make more money in Africa. Hence the focus on promoting the use of those toxic pesticides in Africa. So if you look at the statistics, some of the companies, top companies, the top companies producing those chemicals and the seeds are pushing this in Africa, but it is not for the benefit of Africans. They're in it for their own gains. Yeah. And the sad thing is that some of these pesticides that they push on the African people, they push in Kenya, are extremely toxic. My master's thesis was on pesticides. So I speak from a point of authority when I talk about pesticides. 76% of the pesticides that we are using in Kenya today are highly hazardous pesticides. And this was from research done by the Root to Food Foundation and I think Heinrich Böll Stiftung. Yeah. And it's a pity that we have 76% of the pesticides used in Kenya as highly hazardous. A layman might ask, what do we mean by highly hazardous pesticides? But these are pesticides that have extreme effects on the environment and the human body. So we're talking about short-term and long-term effects.
Yeah.
But we have bodies in Kenya that are responsible for monitoring these pesticides, but somehow these pesticides are still sold. And this is not about politics. This is about our environment. This is about the Kenyan people. And I think, was it in 2021 or so, researchers from the University of Nairobi or Kenyatta University, one of the two universities, I can't recall clearly, they did a research and found that some of the male children, was it in Murang'a? Yeah, they were being born with defects on their male reproductive systems. And one of the reasons was that the mothers, the pregnant women, were actually exposed to pesticides. Yeah. And that's just one of the effects. Those are one that was done. We have several others where pesticides have been found in our sukuma wiki, in our tomatoes. We've seen that in the media. It has been in the mainstream media, in our water. You and I are scientists. We've seen probably publications on the level of pesticide residues in our water. And so when you're speaking about these toxic pesticides, we're looking at the long-term effects. What are the long-term effects of these pesticides on our environment? And people assume that, I'm going to spray on my farm and then after 2 to 3 weeks, it will be gone. No, there's the residual effect. That's what remains, what's the remnant. So there's some of these pesticides that actually remain in the soil. And that's what we are worried about. And if it remains in the soil, it's likely to be, depending on its properties, chemical properties and also environmental factors, like rain, such like, it's likely to be washed into the rivers, leached into the rivers. And we're depending on that for water, right?
Yeah. Those are the water that they use to feed the cows.
The water that feeds the cows, the water that we use for agriculture, and some of those water, the water ends up, for example, in the dams, and then it's pumped, and it comes onto our taps.
Yeah.
So it's a cause for concern that we're not just saying that we don't want this because we're politicizing it, but we're looking at what are the impacts, what are the short-term and long-term impacts of these chemical pesticides on the average Kenyan. And I think only 1 out of 6 farmers in Kenya use protective gear when using this pesticide. So imagine we have 76% of the pesticides as highly hazardous. That means they can cause cancer, they can affect the nervous system, they can affect the reproductive system, but only 1 out of 6 farmers are actually protected. So we're looking at a hazard here and at a disaster, and this doesn't end with the farmers. It also trickles down to consumers, because when you're eating this food, it has the pesticide residues. So you're consuming the residues. Remember, you cannot wash pesticides off a vegetable or off a tomato. No, you can't. And that's one thing that people think they can do that. I'm just going to buy it and then I'll wash it, but you definitely cannot do that.